Hey everybody, welcome back. This is part two of the PowerShell and IAM series. If you haven't watched part one yet, go do that first because everything here builds on what we set up there. Now, like all my videos, the slides are going to be linked in the description and in the comments below on TikTok so you can download them and work through everything at your own pace. Now, I'm just here to walk you through what's happening and kind of explain why each part matters. Let's get into it. So here we are. We've already have two things built from our previous videos. On one side, we have the local Active Directory with our domain controller, the sales OU, the sales users group, and the MS Lopez user account. On the other side, we have a free Entra ID tenant with its default directory. Right now, those two things don't really know about each other. The goal of this video is to connect them. We are going to install a tool called Entra Connect Sync on the server that we already built to point it at both sides and let it carry the identity objects from the local AD into the Entra ID. Now, the reason we're doing this is to show the bigger picture of how PowerShell fits into IAM. In part one, we used it to build and manage identities inside a single directory. In this part, we're going to see how those identities move between systems, which is really what PowerShell ends up doing in a lot of organizations. It becomes this automation layer that feeds identity data from one platform to another. And Entra Connect basically handles that sync itself, while the PowerShell kind of prepares the data, triggers the sync, and manages those objects on both sides. Now, before we get into the setup, let me address the cost question because I know people are going to ask. Everything that we're doing today is free. The Entra ID free tier supports directory sync. Entra Connect Sync itself does not require a paid license, and we do not need a custom public domain because the default tenant domain that ends in onmicrosoft.com is enough for this lab. So the details are on the slide, but the short answer is this costs nothing. With that out of the way, there is one thing we need to sort out before we install anything, and it is probably the most important concept in this entire video. That concept is the login suffix. Our local domain is called corp.lab, but corp.lab is not a real internet domain. It is just a name we made up for our lab. Entra ID does not recognize it because it has never been verified in the tenant. So when Entra Connect tries to sync a user whose login ends in at corp.lab, Entra doesn't know what to do with that suffix and replaces it with the tenant's default on Microsoft.com domain. So rather than letting that happen automatically and ending up confused about why the names look different, we're going to handle it ourselves. We are going to add the tenants on Microsoft.com domain as a alternative login suffix in Active Directory, and then update our test user to use that suffix before we ever run the sync. That way, when the account shows up in Intra, the login name matches exactly what we intended. The next few slides kind of walk through how to do that, but first, let me point out the resource slide. All the links you need for this video are on this slide and they are all clickable. The main one is the Entra Admin Center, which is where you download the Entra Connect installer and where we verify the sync at the end. The rest are just Microsoft documentation pages for the install process, the domain prep guide, and the ID fix tool. Now, you don't need to go through all of these right now. These are just here for reference. So let's get on to fixing that login suffix. The first thing that we need is our tenant's default domain. So you will find this in the Intra Admin Center under domain names. It will be something like yourlabtenant.onmicrosoft.com. Write it down exactly because we are going to type it into Active Directory in the next step and it needs to match perfectly. So once you have that, add it as a login suffix in Active Directory. Adding it is done through a tool called Active Directory Domains and Trusts. What this does is tell AD that in addition to corp.lab, there is now a second valid suffix that user accounts can use. We are not replacing corp.lab. We are just giving AD another option so that when the sync runs, the login name translates cleanly to the cloud side. Steps are basically on the slide. Now, with the suffix added, we just need to update our test user to actually use it. This is where we go into the M. Lopez account and switch her login from at corp.lab to at yourlabtenant.onmicrosoft.com or whatever your domain name is. So you do this through the graphical tool by opening her account properties and changing the suffix dropdown. The steps are on the slide. Now, the reason we do this now and not after the sync is that Entra Connect reads the login name from the local account and uses it as the cloud login. If we get this right before the first sync, everything lines up cleanly on the first try. You can also do this with PowerShell, which is what I'm going to show in this next slide and what it covers. Now, the commands are on the slide. It's the same result as using the graphical tool, just done from the command line. This is a good example of something worth highlighting though. In part one, we used PowerShell to create and manage identity objects. Here, we're using it to actually modify the identity data so that it's ready for a sync to another system. That is a pattern you see all the time in real environments, as I said. Things like where an HR platform fires off a new hire notification, and then a PowerShell script picks it up, creates or updates the account in Active Directory, setting the right attributes. The sync tool will then carries those things to the cloud. PowerShell in this instance is not just for managing what's inside the directory, it's often also the glue between the directory and every other system that touches that identity. So, with our user prepped, there is only one more cleanup step before we can install Entra Connect. That cleanup step is ID Fix. It is a free tool from Microsoft that scans your directory for things that would cause problems during a sync. Duplicate values, formatting errors, invalid characters. Think of it as a pre-flight check. You run it, it tells you if anything needs fixing, and then you handle it before the sync ever starts. For a small lab like ours, there probably won't be any issues, but it is a good habit to build because in a real environment with thousands of accounts, this step saves you a lot of headaches. Now, the steps are on the slide, so with everything prepped, we are now ready to actually install Entra Connect. Before we run the installer for Entra Connect, there are a few things I'd like to confirm. The software needs to be installed on a server that is joined to the domain, which ours already is. It also needs the full graphical interface, which we have because we chose desktop experience in part one, and you need two sets of credentials during setup. One is an admin account for the Entra tenant, and the other is an admin account for the local Active Directory. The full list is on this slide here. With the prerequisites checked, let's get into the installer. The download instructions, they're here. What we are downloading is the Entra Connect Sync, as I mentioned before, which is the tool that basically sits between your local Active Directory and your Entra ID tenant and keeps them in sync. Now, once it's installed, it's going to basically watch change for changes in your local directory and then push them to the cloud on a regular cycle. So when you create a user locally, update a group, or change someone's login name, those changes will eventually show up in Entra ID without anyone having to do it manually on both sides. Now, with the installer downloaded, we need to decide how we want to configure it. Entra Connect gives you two paths. Express, which makes all the decisions for you, and Custom, which lets you control things like which parts of the directory get synced. We're using Custom because it's going to let us scope the sync to just the sales OU. That keeps the demo clean, and it also shows an important step. You do not have to sync your entire directory to the cloud. You can choose exactly what goes up and what stays local. That kind of control is a big part of how organizations manage hybrid identity in practice. So, with that decided, let's walk through the wizard. The installer pretty much starts like any other. Open the file, accept the license, and choose Customize. From here, the wizard's going to walk you through connecting both sides, starting with the cloud. First wizard is going to ask you to sign into your Entra account. This is where it establishes the connection to the cloud side. Use the admin account for the same free tenant we set up in the earlier video. Once you are authenticated, the wizard knows where to send the synced objects. The next, it's going to ask you to connect to the local directory. So you point it at your Active Directory forest and then provide the admin credentials. Entra Connect can create the service account it needs during this step, so you don't have to set that up ahead of time. At this point, the wizard has a connection to both sides, and it just needs to know what to sync and and how. Now, the wizard is going to ask you how you want users to authenticate. You are going to choose password hash sync, which is the simplest option. What that means is just a secure version of the password gets synced to the cloud so users can log into Entra ID with the same password they use locally. No extra infrastructure needed, no paid license needed. Now, this is the step where we tell Entra Connect what to sync. We uncheck everything except the sales OU. That means only the objects inside sales, which is our M. Lopez user and our sales users group, will get pushed to the cloud. Everything else in the directory will stay local. One thing worth understanding here is that the OU itself does not become a cloud object. It is only used as a filter to decide what syncs and what does not. The note on the slide kind of calls this out. Now, review the summary. Make sure sync is enabled and let it install. Once it finishes, Entra Connect is running on the server and the sync engine is active. Now, let's see if it worked. Interconnect syncs automatically every 30 minutes, but we do not want it to sit here and wait. There's a PowerShell command on the slide that forces a sync immediately. This is another example of PowerShell being the tool that drives identity operations. In a production environment, administrators often build this into automated flows. Something changes in the directory, a script triggers a sync, and the update lands in the cloud within minutes instead of waiting for the next schedule cycle. Run the command, give it a moment to complete. Before we go look at the cloud site, all right, we can check the sync status right on our server. There is a built-in tool called synchronization service that shows you the operations that have run, basically. You're going to look for complete runs without errors. If everything shows clean, the data made it out of the local directory and is into the sync pipeline. So now let us go see if it actually landed in Intra. This is the payoff here. Sign into the Entra Admin Center, go to Users, and search for M. Lopez. If she shows up and the account is marked as synced, it worked. Then go to Groups and search for Sales Users. If that shows up as a synced group, then we have confirmed that both of the user and the group were created with PowerShell in Part 1 and are now living in the Entra ID. So I want to make sure the significance of this is clear, right? These are not accounts we created manually in the cloud. These are the same identity objects we built with PowerShell in part one. They originated in the local Active Directory, and Entra Connect carried them to Entra ID. The local directory is still the source of authority for these objects, meaning if you change something locally, it will sync to the cloud on the next cycle. That is hybrid identity. One set of identities managed locally and represented in the cloud. So, stepping back and looking at the full picture across both videos, PowerShell created the identity objects, Entra Connect moved them to the cloud, and in between, PowerShell was also the tool that modified identity data to prepare it for the sync. That workflow is not unique to this lab, okay? It is how a lot of real organizations operate. An HR system, again, fires an event when someone is hired. A PowerShell script, again, picks that up, creates the account in Active Directory, and adds them to the right groups, setting the right attributes for that account. Entra connects to the cloud. Another script might provision access to, software as a service applications or update a ticketing system. Basically, PowerShell is the thread that runs through all of it, connecting systems that were never designed to talk to each other natively. So, understanding that pattern, the idea that identity flows between systems in PowerShell is the automation that lets it happen, right? It's one of the most practical things you can kind of take away from this series. So, if something didn't go right, the common issues and fixes are on this slide. The most frequent problem people hit is the login suffix not matching, which is why we spent time on that earlier. Another common thing is that objects are being outside the OU filter scope or the sync not running yet because it's not triggered. If you have any other issues other than that, you can feel free to comment or DM me directly and show me what's going on, and I can kind of help you walk through it. Now, a few things I want to be upfront about. Our corp.lab domain did not become a cloud sign-in domain. The onmicrosoft.com suffix is what users log in with in this lab. OUs do not exist as cloud objects. They only control what syncs. And using the default tenant domain is a lab shortcut, not how you would set up naming in production. So I want to be transparent about that so no one's walking away with this wrong idea. Now, to wrap it all up, we have found our Entra ID tenant domain, added it as a login suffix in Active Directory, updated our test user, ran a clean check, an ID fix, installed Entra Connect Sync, scoped the sync to Sales OU, and verified that M. Lopez and Sales users now exist in Entra ID. All right. This was the missing piece between Part 1 and Cloud Identity. Part 1 showed how PowerShell manages identity locally. This part showed how those identities get extended into the cloud and how PowerShell fits into every step of that process. So, together, that is the full answer to the original question that I was asked. And this last slide is just all the references and that I have about these topics and some things that you can kind of look into. Every link is clickable. And again, as a reminder, these slides are linked in the description and comments on TikTok. So if this helped, please let me know in the comments. If you have questions or issues, also let me know. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.